Well, I'm here with Kelli Suding and Michelle Soriano from CAST. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much for having
Yeah,
us.
thank you.
So I wanted to talk today. First, I want to get to know CAST a little bit. Could you tell us about what CAST does and how they center students with disabilities?
Absolutely. Great question. So, CAST is really all about reducing barriers, really being proactive in how you're designing your learning environments, how you're designing your curriculum to make sure that we're meeting the needs and we're being proactive about that for all of the kiddos, all of the learners. Even as adults, we need to have things that are proactively planned with specific needs in mind. And we typically take that mindset of, what's required for some is beneficial for all. And so I particularly work on the technical assistance centers at CAST, primarily the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials. And one of the ways that we are truly looking to keep students at the center of what we're working on and how we're pushing out information is to work with our state education agencies and our local education agencies on really how do you build systems? How do you have conversations about your systems that are truly inclusive of all of the students? And so we talk through things like, well, how do you design for accessibility? How do you make sure that you're pushing out information through meaningful professional development for educators and diverse stakeholders around accessibility? And then we even go to the step of, well, how do we think through procurement when we're looking at purchasing curriculum? How are we making sure that it's centered on student needs and making sure that we're using that accessibility lens from the get-go? And so Universal Design for Learning was something that CAST, we're the founders of it. We created UDL, and it's something that we really try to embed because it's a mindset. It's how can you design thinking of the networks in the brain. How do you make sure you're thinking of possible barriers that might be there, and then designing your lessons, designing your environment to where you're pulling in strategies and supports and scaffolds that are going to go ahead and capture and reduce those barriers so that we don't have to wait until our students are not successful. What we want to do is build it into the framework of our lessons, build it into the framework of our environment so that our students are successful, because we know that there are some predictable barriers. And if we know and we can predict them, then guess what? Poof, we can design for them. And so that's really Universal Design for Learning in a nutshell. It's providing multiple means of engagement. How are we looking at ways that we can engage our learners? How are we making sure that we're having some considerations of the multiple ways to engage them? Multiple means of representation. So how are we delivering information? How are we presenting it, designing it so that many students with whatever preferences they might have can perceive it, can take it in? And then how are we providing multiple means of action and expression? How are we considering ways that we're allowing students and learners to show us that they've learned what we were trying to get them to learn? Because if you know those little toys that toddlers have and they have to match the shapes into the correct shape.
Oh, sure.
Well, guess what? We are not all circles. And, I'm a triangle. And if you're trying to form me and push everybody through this circle peg, we're not going to fit because we all have diverse needs. We have different variability of learning. And so just keeping that at the forefront is how we make sure that everything is student-centered.
Yes.
And what shape are you? We heard that Michelle's a triangle.
Oh, you know what? I would say maybe an octagon.
Okay, great.
Hexagon.
Just wanted to get that out of the way.
Thanks for including me.
Yeah.
That's what we're all about, inclusion. And I
Absolutely.
appreciate you validating my hexagon side.
Anytime.
So, yeah, thank you.
I think I'm one of those stars that has like 8 sides. So they're more like circular stars. You know what I mean?
That's amazing. That's so amazing. Yeah, we've got room for our stars, hexagons. Anything, right? So when we talk about access, when it comes to Universal Design for Learning, so Michelle was talking about the 3 principles, that's also designing our content. So that's where at the National Center on AIM, Accessible Education Materials, where the content is crucial when we think about accessibility, because we think about learner variability and how students engage, interact, and decode the information. So that's why also thinking proactively about our materials that we're creating, ensuring that no matter any learner can come in, change the contrast, enlarge the font, whatever they need is designed for a way that, like Michelle said, no matter who's coming into my classroom, I'm
Sure.
ready and they can interact and, change any of the font in whatever format that they need so they can access and participate in their own learning.
That's wonderful. I mean, I know that there's been this explosion of technology in the last year and then subsequent explosion of conversation surrounding AI. And I
Yeah.
wonder, how does UDL interact with the emerging technology of AI and how we think about it?
Yeah, that's such a good question because I think AI so students have been using AI for years. We all have. So if we think about text to speech as AI, using speech to text, word prediction, spell check, that's all AI. And now we're thinking more of the conversations about specifically like generative AI, right? Let's talk about Chat GPT. And now a
Yeah.
lot of educators are fearful of that. And so it fits in line there, just ensuring that that we all access our environments, our space, our education differently. And I think the AI is a great opportunity for really providing those inclusive opportunities as long as it's accessible.
One thing to really consider when you're looking at the UDL guidelines and the UDL framework, they not only have those three principles, engagement, representation, and action expression, but then if you go horizontal, it has identifications on, what are the access row? How are we making sure that we're providing access for learners? The second row is all about the build. How can we provide scaffolds for our learners to make sure that they're able to eventually, bottom row, internalize things? And so when I think about the ways that, and granted, I'm very new, right? I'm dabbling in it and I'm learning how to incorporate, components of AI.
Sure.
But something as an educator that I really enjoy is that sometimes, we can't think of all of the different scaffolds that are available to support for specific skills. But guess what? As an educator, I can pull up good old AI, right? Chat GPT, and I can ask, hey, can you provide me with a list of scaffolds that will support reading comprehension for a second grade learner. And it will give me options. So then when I'm thinking about embedding things in my lessons and I want to embed different options and scaffolds and opportunities for my learners to be able to temporarily use something so that they can eventually become independent on it, AI supported me in that as an educator. So now I'm not missing out on some of those I would have never thought of. So as a former teacher and I'm married to a teacher, we use it all the time because we like to think about how can I come up with different ideas that can support maybe some learners that I haven't reached because I didn't know to consider it.
So you were describing some of the benefits, some of the possibilities of generative AI, specifically Chat GPT and education. I wonder what challenges you see when it comes to individuals with disabilities when they're interacting with AI, with the current AI technologies and even emerging technologies that we don't really know about yet. What challenges do you see?
Yeah, I see that some of the challenges students are facing are the inaccessibility of some of the interfaces. And so like if we have a student who uses a screen reader, being able to navigate from the start to finish. So it's really about the inaccessibility of it. And then also thinking about what the goal is. And so I think sometimes like right now, it feels like it's such a trendy, topic right now. And that
Sure.
always makes me fearful because sometimes when it's trendy, we want to push it out quick because we want to be the ones using it and really not stepping back and thinking about, okay, how can this benefit all of my learners? But what's the goal? So oftentimes we get asked about like, let's just say apps on an iPad or,
Sure.
an extension. Hey, Kelly, what's your favorite app? And I always say, well, what's the goal? So it's really about thinking about being intentional about what the goal is of the activity and then if AI is appropriate or not. So it's really about the feature matching. And so what's good for some is not good for all, like Michelle said. And so really thinking about just, when we're bringing those tools into the classroom, it comes with like training, like teachers are fearful of the use when AI can be so beneficial for students, but because we're fearful, that becomes a barrier for our students because there's components of AI that are really beneficial for our students. So inaccessibility, I think, is one big thing. Being trendy, pushing things into the class for all the students use with really no goal other than saying, go forth and try this. And then it's not, accessible for some of our students, whether, learning disability, physical disability, blindness, low vision, deaf and hard of hearing. Like, we have to think about that. Like, is the AI, if it's creating videos? So let's talk about that. If your AI now, there's a new one that just came, they've been around for a while, but we're hearing about it more.
Sure.
AI, you can take text and it's going to turn it into videos. That's amazing. Okay. That's amazing for some of our students could do that. If it doesn't have captions also generated with it, it's really inaccessible for all the other students. So we have to think about that. If you can use text to generate videos, are you able to use speech to text to even create the videos? Is that the barrier? If I need to hear my mistakes afterward, have text to speech read aloud so I can auditory read back and hear my mistakes, if that's not an option, that becomes a barrier. So it's thinking about user experience from, I always say, from the start to finish. And we just talked about this earlier in our training about, I like to share this GIF, which a GIF is a moving picture, right? Like brings together a message. And it's this button, accessible door. You push the button and the door opens and it comes to stairs. And you're like, okay, it goes to stairs. Well, now what? If I'm in a wheelchair, how do I get up there? So I think about AI, like, we're pushing the button. Oh, we've got this cool AI tool. Let's push it. It opens up and then students can't interact with it because it's not accessible.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to add from the teacher standpoint,
Sure.
because I spoke to the teacher standpoint just a little bit about the benefits. Students with disabilities deserve to have, and it's a right of theirs, the individualization. And I think a barrier could be that if we're not trained as educators in how to appropriately leverage the supports through AI, we don't want that to take away that individualization of identifying what that student's needs are, what are their strengths? What are some things that they need in order to really progress? Because, I've heard educators say, well, we can just put it in there and get ideas, right? For, students who struggle with reading comprehension. Yes, but, right? You really need to stop, hold up, wait a minute. Let's think about the individualized needs of the students, because their needs are very unique and they're very different. And so one barrier that I see rolling into the students is, if we're not trained, like Kelli said, it's top, bottom, right? All the way through. If we're not really talking about ways that we can leverage AI as educators to then support and provide to our students, and we're not really thinking about them in the individualized sense that they deserve, it's their right, then we're failing our students. And so there's like a twofold aspect to that.
And it reminds me of I've heard this across the board, but just recently it's sticking out. The most recent student has to write a 10-page paper. This is a student who really relies on speech to text, text to speech. And because of AI, even though he's been using it, his whole school career, now they're taking his laptops away, all of the students, and making them handwrite these 10-page papers. Now, because of fear of cheating, they're afraid that we're just going to do the input. And think of that barrier. I mean, think about how disempowering that is for this kiddo who has a lot of brilliant things to express and now has to think about writing, and even writing fatigue and having to write that 10-page paper and really have the cognitive load for some individuals with disabilities to have to think about holding a writing utensil and actually putting it down on paper. There's so much lost information there. And I always compare it to the students that have all of these awesome things to say. Like, I'm a previous classroom teacher as well. They would come in from recess and like, Mrs. Suding, oh my gosh, I was out there and the moon was phenomenal. You wouldn't believe the stars. Oh my gosh. I go, oh, write that. Let me hear. I want you to write about that sky. Like, as you're back in there, I get the paper, they're writing it. They come back in, they give it to me. It says the sky was nice. And they say the sky's nice because they can't spell phenomenal. And so thinking about AI has generated this fear. And I think, I'm hoping it'll get better when we start having training, we start having policies and procedures and thinking about student privacy. Like, that's it. But just thinking about how that's really pulling all this information. And we talked about that earlier, how students try to come to us where we should come to them. Like, what are your needs? Like, how do you express that? And so just those simple things, students change, what they're doing. And I'm going to share another story because now I'm on a roll. So thinking about a student who loves spaghetti. So I had this student who loves spaghetti. He loves spaghetti for breakfast, lunch, dinner. He put spaghetti on his ice cream. Like, he was all about spaghetti. And I'm like, okay, this is amazing. And so at the school supporting him, they would have student of the month. And so when you're student of the month, your picture would be hung up in the hallway, and this huge picture, and then it would say your name, and then it have a list of all of these things that you like. So then it gives you an opportunity of your peers being able to see everything that's on there, and then you can make those connections, which would be awesome for this specific student. So I found out he was student of the month. I walked in, we're going to call him Johnny. I always say Johnny. And I said, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And there's Johnny's face hanging up in the picture. And it said Johnny, and then it said his favorite food, and it said fries. Fries. Okay, so right now you're thinking, what in the world? I was like, fries, like spaghetti is like a big part of who he is. Yeah, right? So I went and found Johnny, and I said, first, congratulations. This is amazing. You're student of the month. And he was just like, okay, like real clear. And I said, I noticed you wrote fries, and I know you love spaghetti. What made you say spaghetti? And he said, I couldn't spell it. Okay. So that's just one example of what our students do. Had he been able to use AI technology, word prediction, had he been able to say spaghetti, it would have spelled it out for him. And then he wouldn't have missed out on that piece because he was embarrassed he couldn't spell it. And so we want all of our kids, friend, to eat spaghetti, spell spaghetti, sing spaghetti, sling spaghetti, whatever they need, because that's a part of them. And aligning that with the principles of universal design for learning, when we're thinking about learner variability, how students can engage and show what they know, it is crucial for us to truly get to know our students. We are never going to know fully who our students are if they don't have those options to be able to generate, that content. Let's talk about that relationship building. Yeah. Because AI, accessibility, universal design for learning, and if you're in the field of education, students are not going to lean into it until you're approachable, right? I mean, and you're not going to be able to do any trainings if you're not approachable and you're not leaning into it and really trying to put yourself in their shoes, right? I mean, being relatable is really what's going to get the message out. We can talk about all these things all day long: AI, AIM, technologies, baseball, anything we want to talk about. But if people don't believe you and they're not engaged and you're not like saying it in the terms that's really at the level of understanding where we're coming to them, none of it's going to work. None of it's going to work.
That's interesting. It sounds like you're focusing on the almost like an honesty aspect of it.
1,000,000%. And that, like, I think when we talk about that, sharing our mistakes is more powerful than always sharing our successes. And that comes as a teacher. We have to do that for our students as well, because we're going to do something and we're going to mess it up instead of just pretending it didn't happen. It's like, oh my gosh, did you know, like, this happened to me? And I always share this story that, yes, I'm getting ready to go live and share this about, I was working with the student. I was not being accessible for him. It was this math lesson. And I was like, today, the day, Austin is going to understand this math lesson. And so I read all the directions to him, was super animated, talked for like 10 minutes. And I talked for like 10 minutes. And then I said, okay, Austin, are you ready? Like, I spent like all evening working on this lesson plan. And he looked at me, he said, are you growing a mustache? Because I had talked way too much. Like, it was not independent in his learning at all. It was all teacher centered. That was me. Yeah. And I share that when on a national level, I always share about the mustache because it's important, like, share your mistakes, because then you're hoping that like people can lean into it and say, oh my gosh, that's relatable, Yeah. And then I also told my student, I'm really sorry. First of all, I was like, no, but I said I should have given him, he could have read, with this text to speech, the directions as fast, as slow as he wanted, but I didn't have that option for him. That was my mistake. But when you know better, you do better. That's right.
There's an interesting connection that I'm seeing where, you're expressing this, kind of the beauty, the fun, the whatever of being honest and openly yourself. And I think I'm seeing that same approach when it comes to learning differences among learners, where there's a really strong stance that you don't have to be quote unquote normal. You don't have to be a certain way. You can be exactly who you are, and the learning environment is still for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the word disability is not a bad word, and we need to say that. And students need to understand their disabilities. They have to understand, because it's not going to go away. Let's talk about dyslexia. Dyslexia is not going to go away. We start identifying students with dyslexia like third grade, mostly at third grade, like they're 8 or 9. And by that time, they're so far behind. And educators and parents are fearful to even give them that label. And I'm not saying that we should label every student, but a student with dyslexia has to understand what that means for them.
Sure.
Because if it doesn't, if they feel their whole life that they're not smart because they're comparing themselves to their peers, and then the content's not accessible to them, they don't have opportunities to use AI or the technology because they feel like they just can't do it. And so, that could be like a huge barrier for, students just have to understand. Lean into it and be completely honest about it.
Well, and I think that speaks to, thinking of universal design for learning and taking it back to that. We all have learner variability. There's learner variability in every single human being on this earth. We all learn and process information differently. We all have different needs, different strengths, different quote unquote disabilities that we have to figure out and learn how to work through. And so, I'm horrible at remembering things. So I tend to use a lot of song. I use a lot of rhythm. That's a way that I can bring myself into and adapt the needs so that I can recall information. And so when we think about that when we think about really the quote unquote normal, what is normal, right? Who defines normal? And so having those conversations of, we all have different needs. I used to start every single class setting. All right, y'all, let me tell you, we are a happy learning family, and I might need something that you don't need, and you might need something that he doesn't need. Tell your neighbors it's okay, yo. And they'll turn each other, it's okay, yo. Developing that mindset, right? That we are all going to learn in different ways, using different technologies, using different options, using different means and modalities of things, because we all have differences and we all have different preferences. And what I prefer in reading might be completely different than what I prefer in math. So context matters as well. I share often that I'm a mother of a student who went through the special education system. And I will tell you that is one of the biggest barriers is having my child think that he was so different because he couldn't do things maybe in the same manner that other students were. And there were some barriers built within the system that they didn't allow specific devices and technology available to him, to where, it got really, really bad. And we went down a really rough road, but luckily, we're able to overcome those barriers, and this, things that we're doing now, sharing out information and ideas, you speaking to many people and interviewing, hopefully will help carve a pathway so that every learner, regardless of whether they are a kindergarten learner, all the way up through adult learning, have that opportunity to feel that success, because they are all successful in their own ways.
That's right. And I just want to add that lack of knowledge does not equate to lack of intelligence. If students can't gain the knowledge because things are inaccessible, they're always going to feel that way. And that, and that comes with AI.
Otherwise, what's school for?
100%, friend. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And so with AI coming to the forefront, and think about the inequities of that, our students who aren't able to engage, they have to be just passive users in their learning. They're going to get just further behind when we think about the inequities. When we have other students who, it's completely accessible for them, they immerse themselves in it. As years come, that's going to be like jobs and all of that. So the inequities of students not being able to engage in these new technologies is going to create even more inequities.
Yeah, you both have painted a great picture about what CAST is doing to look at every learner as an individual and to build curriculum and learning environments um, that are designed for all learners universally. Um, and I wonder if you could speak a bit about the resources that CAST has available for folks who want to educators, otherwise, who want to build these inclusive environments for themselves.
Yeah, I would love to start. So, there are tons of resources that are available. First and foremost, when we're talking about universal design for learning, if you go to the CAST website, it is cast.org. You will find that there are UDL guidelines available. So if you just type in the search bar UDL guidelines, it will take you to where you can print out guidelines that have, all of the guidelines and the checkpoints on them. Checkpoints are ways that you can reduce those barriers. You can print out blank copies so you can go in and identify those best practices or those, tried and true strategies that you use as an educator. They are great. We're not saying stop what you're doing. We're saying identify the purpose. Why are you using those? What's the purpose in bringing it into your lesson? How is it supporting learners? And you can do that by leveraging those guidelines, the framework. I like to call it the framework because you have the UDL guidelines, and then within the guidelines, you have guidelines. And so the framework that will help you in that proactive thinking. And then I want to also just let you know that there are tons of videos available
Hmm.
on